Urgent war in Europe. NATO is one step away from falling into Putin's trap. The Baltics are in the Kremlin's crosshairs. Now it's final. The dictator is making the first move, a painful blow directly to the alliance. However, Moscow is holding on by its last strength. The army is falling apart, all because of a brutal betrayal by their own. Our forces are seizing the moment and literally unraveling the remnants of Russian greatness on the front line. These strikes against the enemy will undoubtedly go down in history. The US has launched Plan B. Trump has taken action. He's got Putin by the throat. Xi Jinping has bowed his head. Drones are breaking through. The world is giving a standing ovation. All of this in our episode of Hell Point. Urgent, the Baltics are in the crosshairs. Putin has dared to act. It's hard to believe. NATO's hands are tied. It will all begin with a mysterious train. Wow, Putin's fantasies have reached the breaking point. The Suwalki corridor is back in the spotlight. Evacuation has begun. Will the West manage to seize the initiative and thwart the dictator's plans? Or will the Kremlin still manage to trample the eastern flank underfoot as well? All the details in the report right now.
Representatives of NATO countries, especially those in Europe, and particularly those from the smaller member states, really need to take the time to carefully consider and fully understand the complex and multifaceted nature of the issues and challenges they are currently dealing with.
After Ukraine comes the Baltics. When
Russian people are simply being thrown out across the border, you see, these are very serious matters affecting even the indirect security of our country.
Vladimir Putin is a threat not only to Ukraine's security, but also to other independent states. The Latvian Ministry of Foreign Affairs has officially denied permission for a plane carrying Putin to fly through its airspace. This decision is not just a diplomatic gesture. It is a direct reminder to the Kremlin that, in the civilized world, Putin is the subject of a Hague court warrant. And immediately after that, a new provocation from the Kremlin followed. Russian military aircraft violated Lithuanian airspace. NATO fighter jets were scrambled to intercept them.
This is a blatant violation of international law and territorial integrity of Lithuania. This once again confirms the importance of strengthening the readiness of European air defense forces.
Before this, Russian fighter jets were over Estonia. 2 more aircraft of the Russian Federation appeared over the Petro-Baltic oil and gas platform in the Baltic Sea. Russia has intensified provocations against NATO countries in September. The Kremlin systematically employs hybrid forms of aggression.
In 3 months, Russia produces as much ammunition as all NATO countries combined in a year. We expect the Russian military-industrial complex to produce 1,500 tanks, 3,000 armored vehicles, and 200 missiles this year. Iskander. And in just 5 years, Russia may be ready to go to war against NATO.
For Putin, the capture of Ukraine is not the goal, but just a stage. His plans involve resurrecting the Soviet sphere of influence, where the independence of neighboring countries is only a temporary misunderstanding. A misunderstanding.
In those countries that were widely considered to be among the most unfriendly, and where, interestingly enough, there are actually the highest numbers of relocants. It is notable that President Putin received a total of 56.82% of the vote in the election. In Estonia, 75.22%. In Latvia, 70.6%.
In Crimea, along with military provocations, Russians carry out various can come up with hundreds of pretexts for invasion. The Kremlin has already found familiar narratives for the Baltic countries to justify They openly declare the liberation of brotherly peoples, the granting of additional rights and freedoms, as well as support for Russian speakers. And already today, in the narratives of Kremlin propaganda, Narva is portrayed as a city where Russians are actively oppressed by Estonians.
The Russian language is not taught as such, not even as an elective. and that's why I'm changing jobs, moving to an Orthodox gymnasium where the Russian language and culture are preserved.
The Kremlin has already outlined plans to increase military production and deploy additional troops along their borders, according to the Institute for the Study of War.
Kremlin officials continue to consistently use the same familiar narratives against the Baltic countries, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, that Russia has repeatedly used to justify its invasions of former Soviet republics over the past 3 decades.
The Kremlin continues to chase ghosts. The next target could be the Moscow-Kaliningrad passenger train, which passes through Lithuanian territory. The Kremlin is quite capable of using it as a pretext for invasion, supposedly to rescue peaceful Russians.
No, there is no sense of anxiety. There is an expectation of trouble.
They could also stage a provocation in the Suwałki corridor, on the border between Lithuania and Poland.
This enclave is a real trap for Russia. The shortest supply route for troops there is by land, through Polish territory, past the city of Suwałki. In the West, it is believed that in the event of war, Russia will definitely want to break through at this spot. A corridor to supply the Kaliningrad region.
In Putin's worldview, not only the Baltic countries and Ukraine should be subordinate to Russia, but also part of Poland and Finland.
If Russia really wants to seize the Baltic countries, it will have to do it very quickly. Now, which of course implies war, it will be necessary to minimize as much as possible in order not to reveal its intentions.
Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia are concerned about the increase in Russia's military spending. That is why they are developing a plan for the mass evacuation of 1 million people in the event of a Russian invasion. At the same time, they firmly believe that NATO's Article 5 will still work.
We've been having this conversation since February 2022. Even since March 2014, when Russia first attacked Ukraine and annexed Crimea, the US is no longer willing to defend Europe, as I say, for free. They want Europeans to do their part of the work. I think that's fair. Of course, it's not easy because it means having to cut spending. For example, less funding goes to education, healthcare, and social security. But we, as a frontline state, understand what's at stake. And, coming back to Article 5, people often mention the Budapest Memorandum, comparing Ukraine and NATO guarantees. But there is a difference, and it's a very significant one. Ukraine is not a member of the alliance. And the fact that Russia is so fiercely opposed to Ukraine joining NATO and receiving Article 5 guarantees, to me, is actually proof. Article 5 works.
The scenario of a sudden strike on the alliance's eastern flank is no longer a fantasy. It has become a matter of time and of the West's readiness to respond. Latvia has tightened its immigration rules. Those Russians who either failed the exam or did not submit their documents for EU permanent resident status on time are required to leave the country in Latvia. In addition, starting from November 1st, irregular bus passenger transportation will be prohibited from Latvia to Russia and Belarus. At the border with Russia, the restoration of swamps and peatlands will begin to create a natural barrier in case of aggression. For now, NATO remains confident that an open conflict with Russia can be avoided, at least as long as the Kremlin is preoccupied with the war against Ukraine. However, history teaches us what seemed impossible yesterday can become reality today.
The Ukrainian armed forces have taken a decisive step. They push forward and scatter the enemy's forces in no time. A spectacular victory for our troops in the heart of the front line. This has never happened before. The HIMARS have done their job. A painful blow to Moscow's pride. Pokrovsk continues to devour the Russians. On this section of the front, the enemy is fighting like a fish out of water. The dictator has ordered a new tactic. But the Ukrainian armed forces are not intimidated. Our troops boast of their strength. The Magura naval drone bursts in. What a rout! This is something you have to see with your own eyes. Don't miss it.
The Ukrainian armed forces are advancing on the enemy with strides that even the Kremlin measures in leagues, steps. While Putin's army spends months fighting for every village, our defenders are achieving what seemed impossible. In just one day, they managed to reclaim as many as 3 Ukrainian villages from the Russian army. We're talking about the settlement of Sukitsky and 2 other villages in the Dobropilya direction, Kucherov Yar and Uyut. Thus, as of August 21st, 2025, the situation in this area has been stabilized. Control has been restored over 9 settlements. Another 9 have been cleared of enemy sabotage groups. In just the last 10 days, 1,756 enemy servicemen and 75 pieces of equipment have been destroyed here, of the enemy. The occupier also suffered huge losses in an attempt to break through the Ukrainian front on a neighboring forward section. Thus, the fighters of the 33rd Brigade repelled a massive mechanized assault in the area of Volodymyrivka, Donetsk region. During the battle, the weather conditions were poor, which did not play into the occupiers' hands. At least 3 armored vehicles. The enemy got stuck in the mud, and the infantry that began to disembark from the vehicles came under fire from artillery and drones. At one point, even HIMARS joined in to repel the Russian attack. As a result of the battle, the enemy lost 3 armored vehicles destroyed, 3 drowned, and suffered additional losses. Most of their infantry. However, the Russian army does not give up hope of breaking through our defenses, even on just one section of the front, at any cost, even if it means hundreds or thousands of their soldiers killed.
Every day, basically, there is information that the armed forces have locally pushed out the enemy here, liberated territory there. In all directions, essentially, they are repelling some large-scale attacks. Enemy attacks are being repelled every day in various directions, sometimes dozens of attacks in a single day.
The fiercest fighting is where the enemy is trying to push the armed forces of Ukraine out of Pokrovsk. Enemy sabotage groups are storming the AFU positions there around the clock, non-stop, for the past several days. The situation in this direction remains extremely difficult for the AFU. However, despite all the efforts of the enemy, our defenders courageously hold their defense, Pokrovskaya.
The Pokrovskaya defense has been holding for more than a year. And defense, well, how many thousand Russians? Did someone die there? Well, losses of over 200,000. This is the official confirmation of losses in numbers by foreign intelligence agencies. The second point, how much Russian equipment, how many Russian generals have even been lost in this sector in Hektarnik?
The Pokrovsk direction is the main topic of conversation for Russian propaganda. But when it comes to their so-called achievements on other sections of the front, Kremlin propaganda tries not to spread that information. On TV across the border, it's unlikely they'll show footage like this. Within just minutes of detection, the border guards from the Guard Brigade's reconnaissance strike UAV groups quickly destroy yet another enemy position. As a result, the occupiers lost at least 2 of their tanks, a vehicle, an antenna, electronic warfare equipment, and a significant portion of their personnel in the southern Slobozhansky direction. Despite everything, the Russians have not managed to achieve any significant victories either on the ground or in the air. The only thing the occupiers are good at is creating weapons of mass terror against civilians. A vivid example of this is the barbaric raid on the wind turbines near Kramatorsk. These are civilian critical infrastructure facilities. In this way, the Russians destroyed the 3rd wind power station in Kramatorsk. Before this, the occupiers attacked the wind turbines on October 22nd and 24th. Endless air raids on Ukrainian cities may become the Kremlin's new tactic. To this end, Russia is actively testing new and different types of its own drones. For example, UAVs with a ring wing. An unusual enemy drone was detected by a Ukrainian anti-aircraft drone. Its exact purpose has not yet been determined. However, it is assumed that it can perform both reconnaissance and strike missions. In total, over the past week alone, the enemy sent at least 1,200 drones toward Ukraine and dropped more than 1,360 glide bombs, and used more than 50 missiles of various types. Every Russian strike is an attempt to inflict as much damage as possible on ordinary life. This week, these are strikes on residential buildings, on our people, on children, on civilian infrastructure. These are the main targets for the Russians. Thousands of strikes with various types of weapons in just 1 week. However, military analysts assure that Ukraine's response to Russian terror is also not far off.
Ukraine was, is, and will be And sooner or later, Ukrainian Tomahawks will inevitably meet Russian decision-making centers.
And while the American Tomahawks are still on their way, the security service of Ukraine has shown off its own new acquisitions.
We are handing over this wonderful Magura VS-1, which has already achieved a number of victories.
The drone was purchased with donations from Ukrainians as part of a large-scale fundraising campaign, which was joined by domestic artists, influencers, and athletes.
This Magura Strike Marine drone is the first in the world to have destroyed aerial targets.
Thanks to just one such marine drone, the occupiers can suffer colossal losses. What is the SBU talking about? And they promise to report on it in their upcoming video updates.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
The world's second army in all its glory. Putin is dragging people into the army through deception. It's begun. They're rounding up completely inexperienced Russian conscripts. A cunning scheme in action. And then something unexpected happened. A wave of discontent among the soldiers. Russians are not ready to put up with this. They're whining and swearing. Shocking videos have already spread across the internet. The dictator in agony is losing soldiers every day and seems to be on the brink of a resource collapse. More on this in the following report.
My fellow countrymen, all of them could be walking among us today, talking with their friends and families and living their lives as we do right now. They could have enjoyed more time with loved ones, perhaps even raising more children and watching their families grow. In general, they could have truly benefited their fellow citizens in many ways, whether by offering their support, sharing their experiences, or contributing to the well-being of our communities.
Over 1 million losses in the Russian army since 2022. Cemeteries are overflowing, contract payments have been reduced, and commanders are stealing the death benefits. In the past 2 years, the number of contract signings in Russia has dropped to a minimum. Pokrovsk has been under assault for a year now, with enormous losses being paid as the price. So where do they find new people for Putin's war? A scheme of covert mobilization has been uncovered in Russia. The Russian Ministry of Defense has resorted to extreme measures, sending young people to the slaughter.
We signed the contract on July 5th. In 2025, under psychological pressure from Junior Lieutenant Dasha Dorzieva. It was he who intimidated us, saying that if we stayed as conscripts, we would be sent to Kursk. And if conscripts are sent to Kursk, then out of 100%, only 70 return and 30 die there.
Conscription is a hidden mobilization. Today in Russia, conscripts are becoming a significant force, which the authorities are throwing into
the so-called special military operation, which is a term used by Russian authorities, referring to the conflict in Ukraine.
Cases of coercion to sign military contracts continue. Andriy Smirnov became one such case.
If a contract appears signed, I sign it again. Under psychological or physical pressure, or beatings by the guards.
195,000 rubles were deposited into his bank card. It turned out that this was the first payment under a contract that, as it turned out, had been drawn up in his name. Smirnov claims that the document itself was handwritten and signed by someone else. Other young men cannot withstand the psychological pressure from commanders who persuade them to agree to go to war and not return home to their loved ones.
All of my close friends will slowly disappear one by one. My parents, on the contrary, will suffer. They are beaten. After a difficult and exhausting struggle, they have been overcome by their opponents. Despite their determination and best efforts, they could not withstand the relentless pressure and skill of those they faced. Now, feeling defeated and weary, they must accept the reality of their loss and reflect on what happened.
Deprived of sleep and contact with their families. In some cases, those who refused were shot at with
Under pressure from her relatives, she admitted and confessed that there had been falsifications by the command to sign a contract.
Recruiting conscripts allows contract soldiers and mercenaries to be freed up for new assaults.
They're only 18 years old. They have no combat experience. They don't even have any real life experience. How can they help at the front?
In Russian military units, there is an unofficial plan to recruit contract soldiers from among the youth in the army.
We have evidence of people being put into scorching hot dryers and kept there for a long time until they agreed to sign a contract. People from Kuzbas told me that one conscript managed to resist such pressure and was able not to sign the contract. But at what cost? They broke his femoral head and discharged him early from the army. So he didn't sign the contract, but he was left disabled. And unfortunately, people consider this case a success. These are the kinds of successes we have.
The mother of yet another Russian soldier. She said that her son signed the contract after being pressured.
They proceeded to move directly into it, taking careful steps as they entered, making sure to pay close attention to every detail along the way.
When he submitted a report refusing the contract, it was not accepted, and they claimed that the signing was voluntary. In Primorsky Krai, for refusing to sign a contract, conscripts are not bullied by their fellow soldiers through collective punishment.
But a conscript serving his mandatory military service was forced to sign a contract through coercion and psychological pressure. The child doesn't want to go, but he will be sent to the special military operation. The child is only 18 years old, and he did not sign voluntarily. This coercion was against his will. He had no intention and did not want to sign this contract. They told him, "You have no choice. You'll sign it anyway."
The mother didn't know her son had been taken to war. He thought he would end up in a security unit, but he found himself in Mariupol.
We don't know where our son is. At the moment, we have messages, screenshots with him, audio recordings and video recordings of conversations where he confirms that he signed the contract under pressure against his own will.
Now, conscription into the Russian Federation's army is also taking place in annexed Crimea.
You are now proudly joining the honorable ranks of dedicated defenders of our esteemed military.
Conscripts are being drafted both from Russia and from the occupied territories. Already in the first months of service, they are forced to sign a military contract so that there is a legal document for sending them to war. In addition, law enforcement uses conscript soldiers in battalions for shooting down drones.
Bro, well, steering wheel, so we're flying on conscript duty. Oh, I'm serving, basically 5 of the guys are conscripts. 3 of them, I think. Well, 200 dead and 16 people, 300 wounded. Just conscripts. Drones came in, and here too they fly around quite often. And can you believe it? Guys are shooting down drones and they don't even get paid anything. Even though they said if you shoot down drones, you'll get paid well.
The number of yesterday's conscripts who become contract soldiers and go to war, as human rights activists say, is classified.
Approximately 300,000 people are called up for compulsory service each year, but even if a third of them sign a contract, that's 100,000.
New contracts. This is a kind of forced recruitment, and it goes on constantly. The Russian Ministry of Defense, in order to fulfill Putin's orders, is patching up holes at the front with 18-year-old boys. But no one can help them avoid this. After all, Putin isn't even trying to stop the bloody slaughter.
The Putin era is over. Trump played his part. The US struck unexpectedly. In the Kremlin, everyone was thrown off by such a sudden move from their friend in Washington. Sanctions rained down. Moscow is in shock, making emergency decisions and trying to beg Trump for forgiveness. However, it's all in vain. China has also dared to act, refusing Russian black gold. It seems Russia has found itself in a trap. Is Putin, perhaps for the first time, facing his problems head-on? Will he agree to the West's terms? We'll find out in just a moment.
The US is imposing sanctions which, according to the Kremlin, are nothing to fear. And Putin's special envoy immediately sets off on American tours to curry favor with the overseas masters.
I believe that Russia, the US, and Ukraine are actually quite close to a diplomatic solution. President Zelensky has taken a big step by acknowledging that this is about the front line.
No matter how much the Russian leadership tries to publicly play off the lie that sanctions are supposedly only beneficial, Donald Trump has a different opinion, believing that the new sanctions will cause Russia irreparable harm within 6 months.
Today, Putin stated that Russia is invulnerable to US sanctions. They will not affect the economy of the Russian Federation.
I'm glad he thinks so. That's good. Let's see what happens in 6 months.
In addition, according to Donald Trump, due to the sanctions, China is already reducing its purchases from the Russian Federal Fund of black gold, while India is refusing it altogether.
Now, many people are increasingly encouraged and inspired by Trump's clear and decisive stance, which is truly and genuinely aimed, if not at actually ending the ongoing Russian-Ukrainian war, then at the very least at suspending and putting a temporary halt to active hostilities and fighting between the two sides. American sanctions against Russian oil giants Lukoil and Rosneft, two of the most influential companies in Russia's vast energy sector, have shattered what many describe as the Kremlin's nest of vipers. A tangled web of power, influence, and secretive dealings that has long surrounded the Russian government. Even from his fleeting glance, it was clear that this was a blow to him. Following Trump's decision to impose sanctions and also cancel the meeting with Putin in Budapest, the Russian dictator tried once again to curry favor with Trump. And at the same time as striking civilian targets in Ukraine, kindergartens, residential buildings, and critical infrastructure, the bunker hypocritically declared that dialogue is better than continuing the war.
And he talks about
postponing this meeting? What can be said? Dialogue is always better than confrontation, disputes, or especially war. According to the Wall Street Journal, the sanctions imposed are not the strongest possible blow the White House could deliver to the Kremlin. The US president chose a medium level of severity for the sanctions against Russia.
Why did Trump reach a boiling point in his relationship with Putin? The US president was offered 3 options for sanctions after his patience with the Kremlin over the war in Ukraine ran out.
According to the publication, the strictest sanctions option targeted Russian industry and the top leadership of the aggressor country. And if the Kremlin does not comply with Washington's terms in the near future, the US president may continue and intensify the pressure he has begun.
Western media say that here we should focus on the date of Christmas so that, well, for example, to give a serious impetus to the negotiation process so that by Christmas there is an attempt to stop active hostilities in the Russian-Ukrainian war. This window of opportunity exists right now. Both Ukraine and the US, as well as European partners, are actively working on it. Everyone in the anti-Putin coalition is trying to strengthen both themselves and Trump in turn is also being strengthened by the positions of others. And indeed, there is a chance to suspend hostilities by Christmas.
On October 30th, during his visit to Asia, Trump will meet with Chinese leader Xi Jinping. The White House has confirmed that one of the topics of those talks will be the war in Ukraine and Russian energy resources. The outcome of this meeting will determine the future of the negotiations.
The Iron Hunter is going on the hunt. A new horror for the enemy is on the scene. The ultra-powerful interceptor drone has entered the battle in spectacular fashion. It bursts into the epicenter of the battle instantly, and after the confrontation, not even ashes remain of the enemy. Everyone watches in awe. The effectiveness is staggering. 150 targets have been destroyed, and the enemy is suffering devastating losses, desperately making last-ditch attempts to escape. All the details about this are in the following report.
At speeds of over 300 kilometers per hour. These are the movement parameters of the Ukrainian interceptor drone Sting. The main goal of this little guy is to destroy Russian Shaheds, which the Kremlin unleashes on Ukraine by the hundreds. Sting is entirely a product of the Ukrainian military industry. Its cost is about $2,500, which is several times cheaper than Russian Shaheds. What does this drone do? What makes this interceptor indispensable for Ukrainian air defense? Just a year ago, this method of shooting down Shaheds was unimaginable. Now everything has changed dramatically.
What once seemed laughable has turned into an inexpensive and crucial element of Ukraine's defense. While Russia bombards its cities with increasingly powerful waves of explosive drones, Ukraine is relying more and more on inexpensive interceptors to stop them. This weapon shot down 150 attack drones during a single recent bombardment. Now Ukraine aims to produce 1,000 interceptors.
One of the world's leading news outlets, Business Insider, reports that the Sting-type interceptor drones, which Ukraine is now actively producing, could turn the tide of the war because they are much cheaper.
For Shaheds, these are drones that are often used in attacks. The interceptor drones designed to counter them are significantly more affordable, costing about 10 times less than the strike drones themselves, which are typically deployed to target either civilian or military sites. Because of this substantial cost advantage, it has become much more practical to produce and deploy these interceptor drones in greater numbers. This affordability has directly contributed to the increased adoption and scaling up of such defensive solutions, making it possible to better protect both civilian populations and military targets from aerial threats.
Since the beginning of 2024, Ukrainian drone engineers have actively started converting quadcopters into drones that are capable of destroying Shaheds.
The designs of interceptor drones are rapidly evolving. For example, the Sting is equipped with a warhead that accelerates up to 340 kilometers per hour using 4 spinning blades. This sensor-guided interceptor, produced by the Ukrainian drone manufacturer Wild Hornet, resembles a handheld missile and is small enough to fit in a travel bag. Other interceptors look like small gliders. The crews launching them need to react instantly to threats. The Sting pilot said that his team heads out at night based on intelligence group directions, with only 10 minutes to respond, to intercept approaching Russian drones before they leave the engagement zone.
The improvement of interceptor drones never stops, not even for a minute. Success rates vary from 30% for some interceptors to 80% and 90%. Success depends on a large number of factors: the type of target, the time of interception, the pilot's skills, and many others. Interest in and demand for interceptors has sharply increased not only in Ukraine but also in NATO countries, after the first Russian drones crossed the Polish border. All the more so since the Kremlin continues to invest huge amounts of money in the development and production of Shahed-type attack drones. Ukraine and NATO countries want to have an effective and, most importantly, inexpensive means of countering them.
We are in negotiations with fairly major and significant leaders in certain important market segments worldwide, along with companies and organizations that are genuinely interested in buying a lot of our advanced drones. We are seeing strong demand and growing interest. Some technologies, for example, we have adopted from foreign partners we've worked with. They are integrated into our solutions. And the interest is serious because we have the largest, unfortunately for us, but fortunately for the world, for those who work in the military field, the largest testing ground for military technologies in the world.
During one of the latest attacks on Ukraine, Russia launched nearly 800 aerial targets. And according to Western intelligence estimates, the Kremlin may soon launch up to 2,000 Shaheds of various modifications. Moreover, in Russia, the Shaheds are being modernized, and in the future, they may be able to reach speeds of up to 300 kilometers per hour. Therefore, the introduction of Ukrainian interceptor drones should simplify and make air defense operations more effective. Moreover, from a financial standpoint, Ukrainian interceptors are cost-effective to use, and victory in war always comes down to economically sound decisions.
That's all from me for now. This was me, Darina Hutsakalo. Even more explosive news awaits you in our next episode. In the meantime, don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button. See you soon.